you got to start thinking like a business owner. And if you don't think like a business owner and an entrepreneur, you're never going to be able to be open to new investment opportunities that come along, because you haven't dealt with, your systems in place right now to keep the core of your business going.
Hello and welcome to Pillars of Wealth Creation, where we talk about creating financial success with a special focus on business and real estate. I'm your host, Todd Dexheimer. Now, let's get to it. Hey, real quick before we get started, first of all, I wanted to thank everybody for joining us on the show and for listening. To all my loyal listeners, I really appreciate you, continuing to listen and support the show. If you can go on to iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, wherever you listen, and subscribe to the show, that would be fantastic. Spread the word too. I'd love to, have this reach more and more people. So if you could share it on social media or and just talk about it to other people, that would be fantastic. And the last thing is, if you can go onto iTunes and give us a rating review, hopefully 5 stars, that would be great as well. It just helps us spread the word more, and it helps us continue to get really good guests on the show. We've had some fantastic guests, and I just want to be able to continue to bring fantastic value to you. Go onto our Facebook page too, Pillars of Wealth Facebook page, and I'd like to hear from you as a listener of what you're doing in business, what you've got going on, what you are maybe struggling with or being successful with, and then what we can do on the show to help push you to that next level. Maybe questions we can ask our guests, maybe guests that we can get on the show to talk about certain topics, certain things that are really you're needing some extra support with. So provide for us some feedback on Facebook, and you can also share this out on social media. That would be fantastic as well. I appreciate it. I appreciate you being a either new listener or a loyal listener. I definitely appreciate it, and we will get started with the show. Hello and welcome back to Pillars of Wealth Creation. I'm your host, Todd Dexheimer. With me today, I have Reed Goossens. Reed, how are you doing today?
G'day, mate. How's it going?
It's doing fantastic today. So a little bit about Reed. Reed moved into the U.S. in 2012, and as you could probably hear by his g'day, mate, he's not from the U.S., he's from Australia. So Reed moved in to pursue a career in structural engineering, but then he discovered his passion for real estate investing. So with limited funds, no credit, Reed went from purchasing a small duplex to growing his own real estate investing firm, RSN Property Group. And now Reed focuses on syndication with large multi-million-dollar deals across the U.S. I'm familiar with a lot of those deals, as I know both Reed and his partner. So we'll talk about some of those deals and how they've gotten started. And then Reed also has a podcast as well. We'll talk a little bit about the podcast too. So Reed, with that being said, why don't you give our listeners a little bit more about your background and then what you got going on today?
Yeah, mate. Well, look, thanks for having me on the show. It's been a long time coming. I know we rescheduled this like 4 or 5 times, so my apologies, but really excited to be here and awesome what you're building. Yeah, a little bit about my background. You can clearly hear in the introduction, I'm not from this country. I moved to this country back in 2012 for 2 reasons. I fell in love with one of the beautiful American women that you have here, and my wife. She was my girlfriend at the time, but she's now my wife. And I also fell in love with New York City. So to rewind the clock a few years before that, I studied structural engineering back at the University of Queensland in Australia. I graduated in end of 2006, early 2007, and I moved to United Kingdom to pursue a career working on the 2012 Olympic Games. Through that was an incredible experience. After that year or so in London, I moved to the south of France, where I was a deckhand on a super yacht. I was working for a Russian billionaire. And I know all the media stuff right now about oligarchs. He was clearly an oligarch, and I didn't even know what that meant back in the day. But I worked on that yacht for about a year, And during that time, I'd met Erica when we were backpacking throughout the south of France. Cut a long story short, I traveled across the Atlantic Ocean on this yacht. I had an incredible experience, was in the Caribbean, backpacked through the United States, fell in love with New York. And at the end of 2009, I moved back to Australia. In that time, we kept in contact with Erica. She then moved to Australia to pursue her career. And then into 2011, so at the end of 2009, I picked up the book Rich Dad Poor Dad after spending 2 years abroad, absolutely having the time of my life, early to mid 20s. I came back and I was sitting in my cubicle as a civil engineer, structural engineer. And I was like, there's got to be more to life than just punching the clock. I felt like a star athlete or something, sitting on the sidelines, watching my life go by. And I didn't know what the word entrepreneur meant. But then when I picked up this book, Rich Dad Poor Dad, it sort of really solidified what I needed to be doing. And well, not what I needed to be doing, but how I needed to change my mindset. Fortunately for me, when the blinkers came off after reading that book, I was working in an industry where I already was rubbing shoulders with developers, with ground up, these guys that are worth millions and millions of dollars because I was a structural engineer. So I've had many, many years of experience in the ground up space, building multifamily, retail, infrastructure. And then when I read that book, it sort of, a light went off in my head and I was like, aha, I need to be these real estate developers. It was always a funny saying that I used to walk these sites as a structural engineer, looking at the connections of these steel beams to columns and, how many bolts is in that column? And I was like, I don't bloody care about how many bolts are in the column. I want to know how much you're going to rent the space for. And so I really had this passion, but then I also had a passion to live in the United States because obviously Erica was from the US and I fell in love with New York. So I quit my job in Australia, a very well high-paying job, moved halfway across the world. I didn't know a single soul besides my girlfriend, who's now my wife. We moved to New York City and I had 3 months to get a job in New York City. So I literally pounded the pavement with my portfolio in hand and knocked on every single engineering door I could. And it only takes one yes, Todd, to change your life. And that was exactly what happened to me. I got a job within 2 or 3 weeks of starting looking. I was able to get a visa. And then within within a month of being fresh off the boat, I was at my first New York real estate or New York RIA. And I'd already sort of started developing my understanding of real estate in Australia. But when I moved to the United States, I sort of had to recalibrate because you guys speak at a different pace than what we speak to in terms of investing terminology. And so I had to really get to understand, what's an LLC, how do I get leverage? And within 6 months of moving to the United States, I had my first little duplex, as you mentioned in the introduction. And fast forward the last six or so years, we now, Andrew Campbell and myself, I have to change that introduction. We have Wildhorn Capital and we control about $100 million worth of real estate. And so my big story to all your listeners out there is that if I can move halfway across the world, I literally didn't go to school here. I didn't have friends here. I didn't have family here. I didn't have a job, and I made it happen. And all these years later, we're controlling a lot of multifamily and continuing to grow our business. And I'm sure we're going to talk a lot more about that on today's show. So, yeah.
Well, why don't you tell us a little bit about your first deal or two, and then you've done. I know for sure you guys have done 3 pretty nice size. Well, I guess 4 because the one of them was 2 deals.
Right.
Pretty nice size deals fairly recently. So
Yep.
Why don't you start with maybe kind of your first deal that you did, and then the evolution into some of these larger deals?
Yeah. So the first deal I ever did was a duplex in upstate New York, and I bought that all cash for $38,000. I was, it was Section 8. I didn't really understand Section 8 on paper. It worked fantastic. For me, coming from Australia, and this is another thing that gives me a little bit more of an edge, is an international perspective. In Australia, you would not find a property worth $38,000. You would not find cash flow. It doesn't work like that. The access to financing here in the United States is the best in the world, in my opinion. In terms of commercial lending, we do not have Freddie and Fannie agency debt where you can get non-recourse. That just does not exist in the commercial space in Australia. We have cap rates in Aussie of 1% and 2%. So coming to America where there's literally 4, 5, 6, 7, and people are like, oh, it was an 8 and now it's a 6. It's like, that's still bloody awesome, because we just don't have that in Australia. So think of the San Francisco, the LA, the New York markets the New York CBDs, that is all of Australia. But Australia, we're landlocked. We can only inhabit about 18% of our land because we are an arid desert country. So we're the same size as the mainland United States, excluding Alaska, but we only have 24 million people. So when you put that into perspective, we have not even a tenth of what you guys have in the United States, and we can only inhabit 18% of our land, which jacks the prices up of our properties. And so then, compared to America, where you have another 90%, you've got all these people you've got to house, but you can inhabit, east to west, north to south. It develops secondary markets. It develops multifamily. One other thing, in Australia, multifamily does not exist just because of the lending requirements. So it's all condominiums. So just hugely different to when I first moved here, saw that $38,000 property, bought it all cash. 6 months later, refied a little bit of money out, bought a second one for like $45K, was still working full time. Quickly realized on paper it wasn't working out as best as I thought it was going to be, and that was really come down to sort of the management of Section 8. Also, I learned quickly that on a $38,000 property, my property manager was not probably going to give me a lot of his time on a 7%, $850 a month fee. So I wasn't getting the best tenant in my one little property. Looking back, if I'd bought, say, 10 or 12 of them, then I might, attracted more of his attention. But long story short, we had a bit of a drive-by shooting at one of our properties, or one of my properties. I sold it. I kept one. I then did some flips in Philadelphia because I could. Learned a few lessons, skinned my knees along the way, along those things. And then in 2013, a buddy of mine from Canada came down, and he's also a civil engineer. We studied together at University of Queensland, but he's Canadian. And he had told me that he just closed on a 70 unit, a 70. And I sort of, my jaw dropped. I said, how the hell did you do that? Where'd you get the money to do that? And he told me that he pooled his friends. He had 3 or 4 mates that all put $100K in. He put $100K in. His mum and dad put $100K in. They had about $600,000 or $700,000, and they went and bought like a $2 million property. And it just completely blew my mind. It's sort of this whole idea of using other people's money to leverage and get into the bigger and larger deals. And at that time, I probably had maybe 2013, maybe $500,000 worth of a little portfolio, a couple of duplexes, of flipping a house, but I wasn't financially free. I was still working full time as a structural engineer. It just didn't. I wasn't taking big enough steps. So through that one conversation, it really changed my mind. It was the second aha moment. I read the book Rich Dad Poor Dad. That was the first one. The second one was talking to my buddy Scott Reese, and so he told me about how he got a mentor. So I went out and then tried to find a mentor and try to build that credibility. And through that, I learned, I had to build a brand if I was going to attract capital. I needed to talk about my story, about how I'd moved to the United States and, with nothing, and try to build this thing up. And over the period of a couple of years, I was able to build credibility, raise small amounts of money for my mentor's deals because I could leverage his credibility. And through that, I was able to, escalate or quickly scale to where I was doing my own syndications by myself and me and my business partner, Andrew. So in a nutshell, that's sort of the soup to nuts of how, over the last 6 and 7 years, I've come from going from nothing, trying to learn the tricks of the trade, and now applying it on my own deals here in the United States.
So take me through some of the key things that you and Andrew have had success with, because you guys have purchased, I think, right around 160 unit in San Antonio was your first one. Is that right? Somewhere around
192.
192.
Yeah. So the big key for me was that, so to rewind a little bit back before Andrew and I became a partner, obviously I was raising money for other people's deals, building that credibility, had the podcast going for a couple of years at that point, really trying to build that groundswell of interest in and around me as a personal brand of Reed Goossens. And that's really what I learnt about raising this business of raising capital, is that people invest in you first and foremost. And so being that thought leader was sort of already, that train left the station. I had also hired a couple of analysts, And just from USC, they were undergrads, and they were underwriting my deals. I was paying them, I think, $15-20 an hour. I was looking at deals in Texas, and I was getting really close on 40, 50, 60 unit deals, but I was missing out by smidgens, like 25, 50,000 bucks, because I didn't have that broker relationship. And so when I was introduced to Andrew, I clearly had a skill set, and I had sort of a tool belt of stuff that had already been built. But Andrew had that one thing that I didn't have, which was boots on the ground and that sort of broker relationship. So through that, I had skill set that he didn't have. He was based on the ground. And so key lessons was that you need to partner with someone. You need to build that reputation first and foremost. You need to partner with someone. He had also raised a bunch of money on some other people's deals. And so eventually we had to get into bed with one another, because it was about that we had to leverage each other's skill, that sort of yin and yang type of scenario. I still live here in Los Angeles. He lives in Texas. He sort of is responsible for going and shaking the tree and, seeing what apples fall. And then I take it away with my analysts, and we underwrite. We try and underwrite, as we're talking a little bit offline in the green room, 30, 40, 50 deals, and then trying to see what ones shake out. So that is kind of how I was already looking at deals. I was already getting really close, and I was introduced to Andrew. He sort of had that next little bit to get me over the line, or get us over the line. And that's how we developed that relationship. And that 192 unit deal probably came after underwriting like 60 deals, and trying to build up, a broker relationships for over 12 months. So it was a long time coming, but then deal 1 got into deal 2, got into deal 3, 4, 5, 6. So it was sort of a snowball effect after that. So, yeah.
So I know you just mentioned you did some duplexes. I know Andrew, I don't believe, did much bigger than about a duplex, maybe a fourplex prior to the 192. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Right.
But then you guys went right to 192.
Yeah.
Talk about that mindset shift and what was that? First of all, what was that feeling going into a 192 from a duplex? And then, just take me through that mindset and how you were able to say, let's do this.
Good question. The key to and I mentioned it a couple of times, being involved with a mentor and raising money on other people's deals to start with. It wasn't the first rodeo in terms of me raising money, but it was the first rodeo in terms of doing the soup to nuts. Of underwriting, finding a deal, putting it under contract, doing due diligence, actually now being responsible for all of the equity, not just a small portion of it. So I'd had a bit of experience prior to that, 3-4 deals where I was raising maybe $150,000 to $500,000, $600,000 on other people's deals. And I was just purely focused on the equity. Now bring in the fact that you got to now, looking for, but at the same time, I was also hunting for my own deals. So I sort of had that little bit of understanding of what it needed to happen. But then when you got that one under contract, it was like, okay, let's pull the trigger. That was the biggest thing, where it was like, okay, let's look at our systems. What have we got to do in terms of, due diligence, getting the legal documentation together, making sure we've got all the bank accounts set up. And then obviously the equity piece, which is still, now you're responsible for, instead of $500,000, you're responsible for $6.5 million, which is a huge jump. And that was probably the biggest mental block or jump that I had to do. Even though I'd done a small amounts on other people's deals, it wasn't that sort of sum. And everything else, due diligence and underwriting and walking deals and negotiating with the general contractors. I'd had that experience just from my structural engineering days and being an owner's representative on many ground up construction deals. So that wasn't new to me. But what was new to me was that sort of the sheer scale of going out and raising $6.9 million, about $6.5 million bucks. So that was really scary and a lot of sleepless nights.
So what are give me 3 key key ingredients to be able to go from buying a duplex to buying large apartment complexes. What are 3 key things that you would say can account for that?
Key things: know how to underwrite first and foremost. So if you don't know how to underwrite, you're listening to this podcast, go out and learn it, go out and be educated on it. The second thing is know your market really, really well. And when I say that, I mean, if you choose a market, go and underwrite 50 to 100 deals in that market, not because you might find one, but more because you're going to be an expert in your market. You want to be able to know what things are trading for in terms of price per square foot. What are things renting for in terms of price per square foot? What are the operating expenses, price per door? Really grinding down. It's not sexy. And everyone talks about on these podcasts, we're financially free and yada, yada, yada. But it's taken me since 2009, since I picked up that book, Rich Dad Poor Dad, to only now realizing it's a slog, and doing those, rolling up the sleeves and being willing to get a bit gritty with the underwriting and understanding your market really, really will solidify you as a knowledgeable person in that market. So when a deal does come along, you can pounce on it. That's probably the number one key piece of advice. The second piece of advice is, if you are going to be a syndicator, you need to develop your brand, your personal brand. I started with RSM Property Group. It stands for Reed, Sophie, Nell, my two siblings. That's been around for a long time, but people were confused about it. What's RSM? What does that mean? What is this? Even to a little bit today, the Wildhorn Capital thing is a little bit, people will invest in you first and foremost. So if you are a thought leader in your industry, or in your sphere, I should say, not just in your industry, but in your sphere, that means your friends, your family, your colleagues. I went through the transition of people thought I was a structural engineer. I had to change their mindset that I'm now a syndicator and a real estate investor. So what did I have to do in order to create that shift, that mental shift? I had to build my podcast. I had to build my brand. I had to build the Reed Goossens brand. I had to build, articles on my website that are going to be evergreen content. I had to build a marketing list, an email list, so I can market to people. And over a period of years, I was able to build credibility, and through that credibility, I was able to raise capital. I've hosted a lot of boot camps and seminars and stuff like that to constantly educate people. And then once I've educated them, I can go back and say, hey, I'm now raising money on this awesome deal. I'd love you to be involved. So that's the second piece of advice. So know your market really well. Roll up the sleeves and underwrite a ton of deals. Also develop the your thought leadership platform. And a lot of people out there might be thinking, oh, Jesus, that's so much work. And it is. It's sort of, you're turning two levers. You're trying to look at the deals, and then you also, on the other side of the coin, you're trying to build the credibility with investors. And that's where bringing on a partner, a strategic partner who may be able to take one of those things off the stove, one of those pots off the stove, then you can able to then move forward more efficiently. So underwriting deals, building your thought leadership brand and platform, and making sure you have the money before you have the deal, and then also strategic partnerships in and around different markets that you're looking in.
That's good. That's good. Good stuff. Hey, we're going to take a quick break, and I want to mention a few things. First of all, I've been doing some coaching, and I want to continue to kind of expand that slowly and take on a few clients. And up until recently, I didn't really believe in coaching and taking courses and stuff like that. But I recently, or I shouldn't say recently, it's been a few years now, hired a coach and saw immediate results and have been very happy with it, and decided, as my teaching background, I wanted to do some coaching myself and help other people get the results that I was able to achieve. And so if you're at that point where you think that's the spot for you, or maybe you just want to explore if it's right for you, reach out to me. I'd have a free discovery call with you. We want to make sure that it is the right step for you to take. There might be other things that you can do to get success, and coaching might not be it. But let's have that discovery call to find out if that is the step that you need to take. So it can really make a major impact in your business and get you to that next level. The other thing is John Stiles. He's on this show every single week with me on the Hump Day Hustle. And John Stiles is a real estate agent in Minnesota, and he will help you find a good investment property. John is very knowledgeable and can help you find an investment property. It can also help you sell your investment property. So reach out to John Stiles with Bridge Realty and connect with him. He'll also, consult with you and make sure you guys are the right fit. So give him a call if you're in Minnesota. Reach out to him. He'd love to help as well. Back to the show. Before the show, we kind of talked about the ecosystems of business and business growth. Let's kind of talk about that. I bet you had a good analogy with the table, and so why don't you talk about business growth and how to become successful in business in general?
Yeah, no, I think my journey. I'm a structural engineer, very black and white brain. I didn't have much gray. When someone said to me, go build a podcast, go build a brand, I was like, what the hell is that? But the ability that I have, and I encourage other people to do the same, is I can step back and look at other people. Like as a kid, I always used to break my toys apart and put them back together again, because that's the engineer in me, right? Well, how does this work? I'm going to take it apart, put it back together. And I was able to look at a lot of people, a lot of thought leaders, and see the same steps. And as Tony Robbins says, success leaves clues. And so when I was looking at all these people, I was seeing that they were developing a brand. I was seeing that they were then using that brand to invest in something. I was seeing that they were building education platforms. I was seeing that they were then selling products. And then I was seeing from that, they were able to build what's called an ecosystem of businesses. And as entrepreneurs, we don't just rely on one stream of income. You want multiple streams of income so it's more stable in a downturn. And so as a real estate investor in multifamily, one of the things that I've noticed, besides the thought leadership stuff and the funnel of people coming through, reading books and listening to podcasts and all that great stuff, when you actually get into the real estate of buying real estate, there's so many other little, the blinkers come off and you think, oh gosh, there's all these other ways I can make money. And I spoke to you, obviously, offline, we talked about a table, right? And a table is stable because it has 4 legs. One of those legs is acquisitions, buying real estate. That's and probably the biggest leg. But you can't always rely on acquisitions, because maybe in a downturn, and we're definitely coming along in the cycle right now, you and I were talking about earlier, deals getting harder to pencil. Investors want a certain amount of returns. Trying to meet those returns and what people, sellers want for their properties is very hard. So, but now when you build scale in multifamily, that's one of the biggest things is scale. We have 1,100 units now. We're at some point in the future, we may go in and bring property management in-house. That's another leg of the table. That's support, starting to add stability. Another leg of the table is construction management. And that's what I've been, doing for a long period of time. And, something that we can earn fees from and, keep the lights on, so to speak, if you're not acquiring assets. Another thing we do is we're now buying directly from China products, flooring, lighting, plumbing fixtures. I could potentially go out and start a business doing, selling other products to other people. So you have everything from thought leadership all the way down to buying real estate, through to property management, through to construction management, through to sourcing, materials and making a profit on that. And all of that combined together, all those sort of ingredients, creates a business ecosystem that's extremely stable. And that is when your different legs of the table, you can have a really solid platform to continue, to grow as a business and make sure that you're, providing great services to your investors, providing good returns, but ultimately you're always at the forefront of what that next deal is. And we spoke a little bit about offline that at the end of the day, we're entrepreneurs first and foremost, and we have to be malleable enough to identify good deals that come along. And it might not necessarily be in the multifamily space, which is what, I buy. It might be in a different space. It might be in the office space. It might be in hotels. It might be in co-working spaces that we spoke about earlier. So you always got to be looking for that next thing that's coming, particularly in a down cycle. What is it going to be? And right now, multifamily is super bloody hot and everything is overpriced, in my opinion. So how do you go and try and make a dollar when everything's overpriced? So it's about building those ecosystems around you, building that scale for really long-term wealth.
Yeah, vertically integrating your business as much as you can. And I look at that, and everything I try to do is try to somehow tie back to my main core business and bringing in, like on the construction, for instance, construction management. If you're construction managing your own projects and can construction manage some other projects, that's really good when times are hot, and you're keeping the crews that you've built up, you're keeping them busy. You're still getting the good product prices, product sourcing. all that kind of stuff. And then when the economy turns, well, that's the opportunity to be buying multifamily.
Right.
So there's the opportunity then to bring that construction back into your house because you're buying a lot of projects that are going to need that. So I've looked at doing that too, is bringing more of that construction management in and bringing that into my business, the education, the coaching, and the podcast platform, all that kind of stuff to bring that in. Not only are you building your network of potential investors, but then you're educating other people who can, maybe potentially be strategic partners or just, a good second source of income. And all that kind of stuff. So, I mean, a lot of good things for people to really think of as they're building their core businesses. What other kind of arms and branches can we build to, as you mentioned, I mean, make your table strong and make it sturdy? Because one leg can get hacked off at times. We want to make sure it can still stand.
Yeah, exactly.
Cool. And the other thing that you were talking about is different kind of different strategies within real estate. And I've thought about doing that as well. I know we talked a little bit about the office space prior to recording. When you're looking at, okay, we have potentially different, strategies within real estate, and we could maybe find this, office space and do a value add on or really anything. What is your thought on that as far as, does it make sense to try to do a new strategy, and how do you then train your investors to do that? Have you thought about that yet?
Oh, 100%. As I said, I've come from the world of corporate real estate development. Through structural engineering. All the big dogs that I've rubbed shoulders with, the big developers in LA, in New York, you've never even heard of them. They don't have podcasts. They don't have books. Yeah. They have years of experience, and they're in multiple different assets. They're in medical office buildings. They're in multifamily. They're in office. They're in hotels. One developer I used to work for, he was across 5 different asset classes. That didn't matter to him. And everyone's oldest school of thought of like, oh, you got to be focused on one thing and blah, blah, blah. I agree. You do have to be focused on one thing. There's lease options and bloody flipping and, notes and all that sort of stuff. That's in real estate. When you're getting started, there's a lot of things to shiny objects. When you get started, yes, you want to be focused on one core thing to be good at. But once you build that scale and that trust and credibility with your investors, as a operator and person who is someone responsible for other people's money, it is your fiduciary responsibility to look at other things. And that may be, you're not always going to have multifamily, might not always be that thing. And so, as we said before, we are entrepreneurs first and foremost. As business leaders, we need to set up systems. Once you have that scale, in order to underwrite multiple different asset classes, timing of the market is really important. Looking at market cycles, where are other asset classes falling in their cycles? Where's office space falling? Where is land falling? And I will always look at something that is backed by real estate and has a hard asset component, but it might be in different spaces. I'm looking at co-working spaces. I'm looking at self-storage, but on the condominium style. It's a different style that a buddy of mine and I are looking at in terms of ground-up construction. Looking at maybe some cool eco-friendly building products in terms of supporting the eco wave that's coming through. As my wife is an interior designer, so always being open, and don't be that as the leader of your business. You need to be setting up the system so you can continue doing the day-to-day business. Buying multifamily, underwriting multifamily, all that good stuff. But you also need to have that scale where you can start looking at other asset classes and start understanding why is it maybe more prudent to be in another asset class as different cycles are going in different directions right now. Does that answer the question? Yeah,
absolutely. No, I agree 100%. And we're always wanting to make sure our investors are being taken care of. So if you're underwriting these multifamily deals and they're not making a lot of sense, and you find a co-working space, for instance, that you could do that makes a lot of sense, well, bringing that to your investors is more responsible than just bringing a marginal or sub, a bad deal in multifamily to your investors, just because that's what you do. So, no, I definitely agree. I've put a lot of thought into that. Do I want to also shift and start looking at other, kind of aspects into real estate and other opportunities? And where do you want to go with that?
Yeah, and I think that it's not shifting, right? It's just
not shifting necessarily. But
I always think about my investment portfolio as the food triangle, right? At the bottom of the food triangle, there's all those good bloody foods. There's fruits, there's nuts, there's rice, there's all that stuff. But a fruit is different to a nut, is different to a pasta. And you need to be able to develop that bottom layer of foundation, which I would classify as cash flow, right? You build that cash flow foundation, you can go up the ladder or up the pyramid and do higher risk deals. I would probably class ground up, flipping in the middle there. That's probably a little bit more high risk. And then right at the top is ground up construction. It is completely different kettle of fish. There's so many more risks involved with that, and we could spend a whole podcast talking about ground up construction. But if you think of it like that, if you're always shoving cash flowing deals or businesses or whatever it might be into that bottom layer, you can then go off and in that bottom layer, you probably have some diversification, business cash flow, multifamily cash flow. You might have a mobile home park. You might see an office space that's working really well. If the numbers make sense and you're timing the market correctly, go and shove it in that bottom layer. It's producing cash flow. It's producing a solid foundation. Then you may want to do some sexy ground up construction in the future. I know I do. But right now, the cost of construction here in Los Angeles and across the country is ridiculously expensive. And, you've got to time the market right. So there's just different things. And that's why I always look at it like that portfolio triangle, I call it. Always be shoving, cash flowing assets in that bottom layer to then obviously go off and do more sexy projects in the future.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. Definitely. Well, and you mentioned that the distraction, you want to be focused on one thing. We don't want to be bouncing all over the place. And that's true to an extent. But I mean, when you really think about the nuts and bolts of that real estate, especially as we talk about, buying a value add apartment building versus buying a value add office space, there's some differences, but they're really fundamentally the same.
Right.
And same thing with even ground up construction versus value add. There's different risk factors, but they're essentially the same. We're value adding onto that land, doing value add construction. We're still doing construction. We're still doing lease up. We're still doing all those things. So it's a lot of the same. There's some differences, but honestly, if you can do one, I think you can do the other ones without totally losing focus on your core business.
And the beauty of it is that you can now look at other businesses, like not even backed by real estate, just businesses in general. I was in the Philippines just recently, and they had all these domestic airlines. And there was one schmick airline called Air Asia that just came on the market. It was beautiful planes. It was, had really awesome customer service. But I found out through just quizzing one of the pilots or one of the air hostesses that it was an old company. They just came in, bought that company, rebranded it, did up, the assets with the planes, did up the customer service, did up more technology, became better on their operations, created a marketing brand around it. It's still adding value. You're adding value. It just happens to be a business. That's the beauty of understanding multifamily and value add. Insert your widget there. It can be multifamily. It could be an airline company. Anything that you're adding value to that can increase the NOI, that will then increase the cash flow and thus increase the value, is why you invest in commercial real estate. And businesses fall under that as well. So it's just difference when, again, taking off those blinkers and really understanding how businesses work. You look at the Amazons of the world, they're trying to control everything in which we touch, because they're trying to, they want to own, there's a saying I came up with, I don't know if I came up with it, but I've heard it, own the veins, not the blood. You want to own the sort of the things that, and it's what Amazon's doing. Jeff Bezos he's owning everything he can touch, supply chain from China all the way to your front door and everything in between. And he's owning that, the vein, not necessarily the product that is being delivered to you, which is the blood. He's owning the vein, which is this, essentially the fundamentals, which is, again, a whole nother business strategy story we could talk about. But it's something that really excites me, because when you do start seeing those opportunities in business, we spoke about the multifamily, the construction management, the property management, the lid comes off, and all of a sudden you're walking around going, wow, there's so much opportunity in this world that you got to then think about, the shiny object syndrome we spoke about earlier. But the fact that you can identify it and as an entrepreneur, identify what's a good investment, that is a core business of what we do, is identifying great investment opportunities. But then also seeing the smorgasbord of things out there in the world is really, really exciting. So, yeah.
Let's talk about that real quick. You just mentioned the shiny object syndrome. A lot of entrepreneurs fall into that because we get excited, like you're just talking about all these different potential opportunities, how much, it's just a world of abundance, honestly. Right. I mean, there's so much out there that we can all be a part of and grow. And so how do we stop ourselves from that shiny object syndrome, yet still push forward and increase and grow our businesses?
Good question. So I can't remember the gentleman's name, but I was listening to a podcast the other day, and they're talking about the diamond effect. The most profitable small business structure is what's called the diamond effect. So you think of a diamond. At the top of the diamond is you, the entrepreneur. Below, the two other points below you are you're called your workers. And then the fourth point at the bottom is administration. And they cut your time up into black, blue, and red. Black is the business thought leadership stuff. It is the stuff that the podcasting, the book writing, the education, the feeding the funnel, what new ideas. We're going to go chase an office space. Let's go chase an office space. You probably, as an entrepreneur, need to be spending 70 to 80% of your time in that black space, and maybe 20 to 30% of your time in the blue space. The blue space is we got two employees where they are doing the day-to-day. So they're underwriting the deals. They're making sure investors are getting their K1s. They're doing everything that they can to keep the business running. And then they want to be spending most of their time in the blue space. And then you have the bottom space, which is the red space, which is all administration. And you never, as the lead entrepreneur, never want to be in that administration space. You're not saying that you will never, as a solo entrepreneur when you first start, you probably are going to be doing your books and trying to cut corners. And I know I did. And you got to be willing to roll up the sleeves to do it. But when you start developing that true vision for yourself, you need to be developing this idea of a diamond. And then a diamond can be replicated, right? So if you have two business partners, they need to have a diamond below them. So it's, and that forms then a triangle. So there are all these different ways of scaling a business, but the most profitable way is that diamond shaped, specifically if you are a small business owner, to make sure that you're in that black space, 50 to 70% of your day. You're only in the blue space a little bit. You've got other people to deal with that blue space stuff, and the red space stuff you never want to touch. But the way in which why I'm saying this is because you got to start thinking like a business owner. And if you don't think like a business owner and an entrepreneur, you're never going to be able to be open to new investment opportunities that come along, because you haven't dealt with, your systems in place right now to keep the core of your business going. Does that make sense? Yeah,
absolutely. There's a book I'm reading right now. It's called Clockwork, and they talk a lot about that. I don't know if you've read that book.
No, I haven't.
Yeah, it talks a lot about, the entrepreneur, the leader of the business is going to be in that design kind of phase. And that's what they should be spending their most time, is developing and growing the business versus, like you said, the day-to-day, what you can have your employees do, or the admin.
Or 1099,
Yeah.
And there's so many, and just sorry to cut you off, but if you're right now listening to this podcast and you've got mundane things like underwriting deals, or something that, go out and getting yellow letters out there, whatever you're doing, I don't know what your business might be. If anything you can pay $20 an hour for, you should outsource that immediately. That is not some of your time you should be wasting on. You should be having other people do it so you can focus on being the captain of the ship and making sure you're steering the ship in the right direction. The people who are rowing, you don't need to be down there rowing with them. So changing that mindset as a leader, thought leader, business owner, and investor.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we're kind of getting long on time, but I really liked where this conversation is going. I haven't asked a lot of my typical questions, which is perfectly fine with me. One question I do like to ask is, what's a big mistake that you've made, and how have you learned from it?
Oh, there's been plenty, man. I think the fact is you got to be not afraid of failure. It's going to happen, like everyone. One of the bigger mistakes was one of the flips I did in Philadelphia. We just bought it. The ARV, the after repair value, wasn't there. A different business partner and I bought this 2-story row house. The house next to it was a 3. So we did build the 3rd floor and put a rooftop deck on it. As a structural engineer, I did all the structural engineering drawings, but we bought it at like 110K. We thought we could get away with doing it for 170. It ended up costing us 230. And the ARV at the end, was really only floating around 350 to 400 at max. We needed more meat on that bone to account for overages, time, existing assets. You rip up the floorboards, oh crap, we've got to replace all the joists. I didn't count for that. So there's just different things that, and that goes back to, we nearly pretty much did a ground up construction on that phase. And it just comes down to estimating on the front end, make sure you got the right budgets in place. And that only comes from experience. And that's where ground up / that real heavy lift value add can bite you in the ass if you're not careful. So really understanding what you're estimating and how you're estimating. If you're going to go into the line of flipping or doing some ground up construction, and really get people around you who know what they're talking about. And then we also had a general contractor who stole a bunch of stuff from us. It ended up getting pretty messy. We ended up having to take over as GC. I was negotiating with the city. He was closing up walls before the duct work had been signed off. I got the yellow, I think it's called a yellow tag or green tag, whatever it was. So I had to reopen walls. It was just a whole thing. But I'd kind of experienced a little bit of that dealing with local cities and municipalities through my engineering job. So it wasn't unknown to me, but again, it's a it's a relationship business. I had to sort of plead with the city, say, hey, look, we're burning, we're hurting here. Is there another way we can try and get this duct work signed off and this electric signed off without having to rip the whole place apart? And just negotiating and understanding that they've got wants and needs and safety factors and all that sort of stuff. And I had a want and need that I need to get the bloody job done because I wasn't going to get paid. And at the end, I didn't lose my shirt, but I didn't make any money. I actually lost a little bit of money on that deal. I made sure my dad and my uncle, who were both investors in the deal, were made whole and got a little bit of a profit on top of that. But a big lesson learned, and it really boils down to the numbers. I didn't buy right, I underestimated the turn. So yeah.
No, two very important things. Obviously, buy right and know your numbers. Knowing your numbers, I would say, is even more important than just buying right. I mean, knowing how much it's going to take to renovate the property is going to alleviate a lot of mistakes. You want to have enough capital for one, and then two is if you know your numbers very well, you probably just wouldn't have done that deal.
Just the things you don't know can kill you, right? So ripping up the floorboards and realizing you've got to go spend another $2,000 or $3,000 replacing all the joists. That doesn't actually, I could have spent that money on tiles or something nice to make the ARV. That we ended up selling it really quickly, which was great, but it just took a long time with all the hiccups along the way. Instead of taking 6 to 10 months to build it or to do, it took more like 10 to 14, I think, months by the time we sold it. So just a lot long in the tooth.
Well, and that's an important thing that you just said there. You ended up selling it quickly. And that's something I see a lot of flippers make that mistake. And I saw it definitely when the market was crashing, but even still today, I see investors that think that their property is worth, let's say, $300,000, $400,000, whatever it is. And they aren't getting that price. And so they just hold on to it and wait until the market tries to catch them because they don't want to take that loss. And I see that quite a bit, whether it's with multifamily or flips. It's usually more in flips, but I saw people in 2008 and 9 chase the market down and always be just ahead of the market because they didn't want to lose that much money, and they just chase it down. until finally they're done.
It's funny you say that. We live in a neighborhood here in LA, and I went to a couple of open houses, and literally things are selling for, or trying to sell for $1.1 million. A duplex just around the corner from us sold for $1.3 million, done up. Now that was the last thing that sold recently, and there's probably about 4 or 5 other houses literally within 2 blocks of walking. I've been to all those open houses. These are single families, 2 bedroom, 1 bath, trying to sell for $1.1 million. And all of them are still on the market, and they've been on the market for at least 60 days. And you just know that. And one of them I walked into, I think they started at 1.2, they reduced it to 1,050,000 bucks. I just know that they're burning, and I still see a full sale sign. And that was a month ago, and that was they'd already been on the market for 60 days at that time. So I'm seeing things in an LA market, which is very similar to what you were seeing probably back in 2008, which is giving me a little bit of pause. Not only as a buyer, because I'm trying to buy a house right now, but just where we are in the market cycle altogether. People are trying to chase that, as you're talking about, chase that market down, which is kind of scary right now. So
definitely interesting times to come. We'll see what happens. I got 2 last questions before we wrap up. First, what's your favorite book?
Oh, it's got to be Rich Dad Poor Dad. But let me give you a couple, actually, because those people who are probably listening to the show, the newbies, or just don't know where to start and trying to get, find focus, is Rich Dad Poor Dad. That's obviously a really great book that helped me. I don't read a lot of Robert Kiyosaki stuff anymore, but I now read a lot of business development books. If you want to talk about systems, 4-Hour Work Week, if you haven't read it, read it. Another one is called Key Person of Influence by Dan Priestley. He's an Australian guy. Really awesome. KPI. Pick up that book if you want to be a thought leader, you want to start raising capital. KPI. And for those people, I launched my own bloody book recently. So if you're interested, I've got a new book out online called Investing in the US. It's the ultimate guide to US real estate. And it's sort of my journey, but really breaks it down for those people who might not be at that stage yet to go out and raise money yet, but they're just trying to look for new markets and understand how I went through the same thought process moving to this country and not knowing anything. So a couple of books there for people to go get their hands on.
Perfect. The last question before I get all the information for my listeners to get in touch with you is, what are your 3 pillars of wealth creation?
Good question. I think this is more a philosophical question for me. My 3 pillars, a quote my dad always told me back in the day: a fool and their money are easily parted. So go out and be educated. Ignorance is not an excuse anymore. We live in 2019. And that brings me to my second one, is never, ever stop learning. And as a business owner myself, I'm constantly learning. I love doing these things, these interviews with people and other thought leaders, because I get to learn. I'm always learning myself. I'm always going to be a student, because I want to continue to learn. Never think you've made it, because, as I said, what I told you before, what you don't know can kill you. And the third piece of advice is that you do have to be willing to roll up the sleeves a little bit and get dirty and get the nails dirty in order to grind. You got to have that bit of grind about you. I grew up with not a lot of money. I was at my first job. I was at 13. Trying to in a cafe. I was working from a young age, and you got to be willing to hustle. If you're not, full of money easily parted, never stop being a student. And if you're not willing to hustle, they're sort of the 3 pillars of wealth, and back yourself. They're the 3 for me, I guess.
Yeah. Love them. So Reed, how can our listeners get in touch with you? You've got a podcast. Where can they find that? And then obviously, if they want to talk to you about investing or anything else.
So head over to reedgoossens.com. It's ReedGoossens. There's a lot of there's 3 sets of doubles in there. But head over there. You can check out, I've got a free ebook you can download called the 4P Rule, about how to start raising capital like a pro. I've got my new book out, hardback book, called Investing in the US, The Ultimate Guide to US Real Estate. It is all the best episodes from my podcast jammed into a book. You can obviously listen to the podcast. You can check out some of my YouTube stuff. It's all there. There's a couple of articles about underwriting. If you're interested in underwriting, check it all out. And if you do have any questions, hit me up at info reedgoossens.com. And I do encourage people, if they're ever coming through LA, they want to grab a beer, they want to, go out for coffee, go out for lunch, just hit me up and we'll make it happen.
Awesome. Well, Reed, I appreciate the time. Ton of value you added to the show. So I definitely appreciate that. Good chat with you as always.
Thanks, man.
Have a good rest of the day. Hey, special thanks to Reed Goossens for joining us on the show, and I appreciate him coming on and spending time with us. Definitely learned a ton from Reed. Lots of great energy, good information too from him. So a couple things I took from him. First of all, he talks about finding the right partner, finding a partner that provides you the missing links, that provides you with those missing ingredients, as he said. So extremely important, obviously, is finding partners that can help you get to where you want to go. And just because you have to give up a little bit to achieve that doesn't mean that that's a bad thing. So he talks definitely about that. Also talks about developing your brand. Today's market, it's so easy to develop our brands now. We've got a podcast, you can do blogs and different articles, you can obviously write a book, you can do webinars and Facebook Lives and just Facebook and LinkedIn and other social media posts. You can do an email blasts and so much more. Go to conferences, be a speaker at conferences. There's just so many different ways to get in front of people, build a brand, and make sure you build awareness, YouTube, all kinds of stuff. So I could keep on going on the different strategies and figure out what's right for you, and then use that to build that your brand. The next thing he talks about is, breaking down the parts of, for success, making sure you break down all the parts and understand what's needed to get there. So, appreciate Reed being on the show again and spending time with us. I think it was a great episode. Go back and re-listen to it and make sure you write down one thing, a minimum of one thing that you can take and implement into your business today. That's going to help you get to that next level. So I challenge you, what's that one thing that you can take from this episode that's going to make you really get to that next level and continue to push on, or continue to be at the high level that you're at right now. I'm Todd Dexheimer. I'm signing out. Make every day a Saturday. Hey, thanks for listening to the show. Couple things before we go. Again, go on to our Facebook page, Pillars of Wealth. We'd love to have you on there. Go on to iTunes, give us a rating and review, and subscribe to the show. Also, don't forget, reach out to me if you want any help with potentially growing your business, and reach out to John Stiles to help you buy or sell real estate. Thanks for listening. We appreciate it. Have a fantastic the rest of the day. And as I say, make every day a Saturday.